EGM, the Ear Glue Media Network.
You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Adler and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is episode 281, Visions and Prophecy, or Visions and Prophecies, I should say. So we teased this a few weeks ago, and the Vanity Fair release kind of threw a small wrench in our show schedule, but we're back as promised to kind of pick up where we left off with Master and Apprentice and talk through some of the visions and prophecies that we have seen or read about in other Star Wars media as well. So before we do, please welcome our very own prophet and soothsayer. I'm speaking of none other than our very own Jonesy. Jonesy, welcome to the show, and have you foreseen how this show will turn out?
I foresee this will be amazing, and you will be more amazing than you've ever been.
Wow, thank you.
You will become the most amazing podcaster to ever do episode 281 of the Cantina Cast.
You completely discredited yourself at this point. So, but thank you. How are things going?
It will be true. Going great, man.
Yeah, we've got, well, let's jump into the news and maybe touch on the very first thing here that's probably pretty close to your heart and your wallet. This is Galaxy's Edge is open, kind of, but not really, because I think we had, what's that?
Right. Yeah. It officially opens on the 31st, tomorrow, I believe, but yeah, tomorrow. We're recording this on Thursday, the 30th. They did a big grand opening last night at Disneyland, and they had a live webcast of it, and they pulled out all the stops. Did you happen to catch any of the video or the pictures of it?
I saw that you posted pictures. I saw Hamill, Billy D. Williams was there, and beyond that, I don't think I didn't get a chance to look too much into it.
Right, yeah. So George Lucas came out.
Who? I'm kidding.
Yeah, George Lucas, of all people.
Yeah.
It caught me off guard. He was the very first one out there that Bob Iger brought out and wanted to give him all the credit, which I think is due. And it was really a classic George Lucas line when he went up to talk, because he's very awkward, of course. And the first thing he says was, this was something that could have gone very bad, but it didn't.
Is that what he said?
Yeah, he said, but it didn't.
Oh.
And that was really about it, And he said that Disney did a fantastic job. He actually had praise, which he's not. I mean, you know how George is. He's not really open with overt praise, or very direct praise at the very least, right? So it was very kind of out of character that he was very clear about the direction they gave, and he was very satisfied with how it ended up.
That's awesome. I wonder if he had to wait in line for anything, or they just.
Oh, I'm sure he did it with the riffraff.
Yeah, he just stayed there with the serfs. Well, there were no serfs at this one, from what I saw.
Right, and then of course Billy D and Mark Hamill. Mark gushed over the fans, which was really great. It was nice to see him. There's a lot of speculation that Disney's not very happy with Mark Hamill, but clearly they had him there. And then when they went to start the ride, of course, the Falcon did what the Falcon does, and it failed. And they had to have someone come out to fix it.
Oh, that wasn't part of the gimmick or anything? That was actually, it failed?
No, it was 100% part of the gimmick, because then Harrison Ford came out. Yeah. So he knew how to fix it, right? And then the plan kind of fell apart a little bit. So he was the idea was that he would walk up to the Falcon and give it a bang, and the whole thing would come up. So he walked up to the Falcon and hesitated, and then turned around and kind of, did his finger wag to say, Peter, this one's for you.
Mm-hmm.
But everything went on as he was saying that. So clearly he caught whoever the operator was off guard on the timing of it.
Right.
So when he turned around to hit it, it was already going, and he hit a couple of times. And then him and Bob Iger were like, oh, well, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
But it was a sweet moment, giving a tribute to Peter Mayhew. It would have been cool if he would have asked Peter to help him out, and then it would have fired up.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been pretty sweet. But it was short and sweet. It was like a 20-minute thing, 30-minute thing. And
so what's the word on the street? Like, have you had a chance to look at any of the feedback people posting? I know people are out there posting videos, and I've seen pictures of some of the swag they bought, the things that they purchased, that sort of thing. But what's, I guess, the overall feeling here with this? Is it really everything we thought it would be and more?
Well, some of the swag I saw posted, I was less than impressed with. I think Mike had some of the same feedback as well. I've not been able to see the fan feedback yet because this thing has been this is like the third opening they've had. Katie and I were talking about this in Discord last night, and they've had soft openings for this already where they're bringing in special people or
family,
limited run type stuff. Mm-hmm. And they have not let anybody talk about it, even though they've published a lot of the experiences already. So I really don't know if people are enjoying this or not. Of course, everyone that they put on air, they put in front of a camera, can't stop talking about how much they love it. I think they're going to knock it out of the park. I have no doubt this is going to be a great ride, and the Falcon is probably the best one for them to put out there. And I have no doubt that when we get the feedback, more often than not, actually probably overwhelmingly, this is going to be a very, very positive reaction to it.
Yeah,
I feel confident going into it saying that that's going to happen because Disney doesn't screw this stuff up. They just can't screw this stuff up, and they don't. And that's just the reality of it. And if people want to hate on it, they're just going to be wrong, unfortunately.
Yeah, we've talked about it. I think they do a lot of things really well, and most things really well. You can argue they have some lame ducks here and there every once in a great while, but for the most part, yeah, they've got a lot of this down, and so I don't anticipate this will be any different with the park itself. So
we'll have a couple listeners out there just in the next couple of days. I think Rhonda Lou from Discord and then Katie are both supposed to be out there, I think maybe as early as this weekend. So we should get some firsthand knowledge about what their experiences are and what they think about it.
Yeah. So yeah, strap on a GoPro, guys, and send us pics or video, whatever you need to do.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, if you've got $25,000 sitting in your pocket and you've got nothing else to do this weekend, don't forget Galaxy's Edge is opened, and you're more than welcome to head out there and blow all that in minutes. So,
sold.
Yeah. Alphabet Squadron is the next item we've got up. And this is just kind of a continuation of what we spoke about on the last episode. They finally released the last character, which is Chas. And this is the B-Wing pilot. I believe this is a female character as well. So now we've got all 5 of them, and they've recently released an excerpt as well, which has some kind of cool stuff about the name itself, Alphabet Squadron. Not really an origin per se, but just there's a moment in there where they finally kind of see it for the first time, the characters. But it's very short. It's very sweet and simple. I think it's probably just to kind of whet your appetite if you really are kind of chomping at the bit for this. But this all comes out June 11th, so we're less than 2 weeks away from the release of this book, and it's something we'll definitely pick up. We don't cover every single Star Wars book on here, although we've gotten in a pretty good groove with most of these because they've been pretty decent and pretty solid. But I guess we'll see how this one plays out and whether or not it's something we feel like we need to bring back here. I'm going to guess we do because I just like the fact that it ties into the comics as well. We're going to get something there. And I'm hoping that Alexander Freed's going to give us some other things to speak about or talk about, given that this, where it falls in the timeline of things.
Yeah, and I've got the TIE Fighter comics accumulating in my Comixology account right now. So I'm excited to get into those and read those because, like you were saying, there is a direct tie-in between them. I think more on the Empire side for the comic, and this is more on the Rebellion side or the post-Rebellion side. But yeah, I think some of this also is, Hera's in this book. How much does she really factor into it? She's the general, so she's doling out the orders. So I'm assuming not a whole lot, and it's really going to be focused on these handful of characters. We'll have to see if this is something we want to come back to, if it kind of digs into the lore of our sweet spot of the galaxy here.
Yep. I've got a question. Where did Matt Smith go? Because there was... Last week,
there's no Matt Smith.
There's no Matt Smith. I don't know who you're talking about. So Matt Smith, for those of you who don't know, what was he in? He was in that little TV show. What was the name of that one?
I don't know, something with a TARDIS. That doesn't even make sense. Are those words real?
I don't think so. But
Doctor Who, yes.
Yeah, that guy. So yeah, anyways, just joking. He was, he's, I guess, one of the more recent Doctor Who doctors, and he's been in the credits. We've known about this for some time now, that he had been casted, and for I guess a number of weeks, months ish, he's been listed on the Disney sites as being one of the actors in the credits for Rise of Skywalker. And then as of I don't know, maybe about 5 or 6 days ago, his name disappeared off there. And I think people are trying to tie this into maybe this is given away too much. Maybe he's got some link to Palpatine, or there's some secrecy. There's a veil of secrecy that exists around him being there. And so officially they don't want him showing just yet because we're going to get a big reveal of some type. I don't know what that is, but nonetheless, his name is gone. We went out there and tried to look at this, validate it, but we don't really know that his name was on there to begin with. So we're going off the faith of the internet, and we all know how reliable that can be at times. So, right. All this to say is I have no reason to think that he's not in the movie. Why they would pull his name if they did is kind of suspicious, I guess. I mean, definitely is on the surface, but there may be some other, artistic reason, or they're going to give him bigger credits, or who knows what they're going to do with this guy. But
right,
we'll keep you guys posted.
Yeah, it's not really a secretive thing, though, right?
No, that's what I'm saying.
You're in the movie, you're not in the movie. Okay.
Yeah, they didn't pull him. I mean, it's not that.
Right.
I think they would announce that before they did anything else. But all right, let's talk about Knights of the Old Republic. There's just going. I mean, this is like
every week.
Or every day there's a new site source saying that they've got a source close to Lucasfilm, but not really in Lucasfilm, or they've heard, or my cousin's best friend's former roommate told me this kind of thing, that there's a Knights of the Old Republic, either TV show or movie in the works. And some of this, honestly, is just the sites pulling the information from the other site, who pulled it from the other site, who pulled it from the other site, because they keep saying the same thing over and over again. There's really nothing substantial or concrete here. So again, grain of salt with this one. We don't know for a fact that this is going to happen. And there's really no way there's no indication that it would, other than just, again, these rumblings, which are all the same one message replayed, regurgitated, recycled by a lot of these sites as well. All that, I would really like to see this, and we've talked about it here a number of times. And I think if we ever get anything more substantial or concrete or confirmed, then I think we probably owe it to ourselves and to some of our listeners to get into some really hard speculation on what we'd like to see and what that would look like going forward.
Right. Hardcore fans are really chomping for where there's smoke, there's fire. And unfortunately, we're kind of creating a smoke circle or signal by just the regurgitating of the information. So it's difficult to see if it's really anything tangible, or if it's just one person's speculation that happened to land in the right hands and ended up in the media, or something along those lines, where it really has no credibility to it. But, at some point, it seems like a safe bet. We are going to get something eventually. What that turns out to be, I don't know, but we can be hopeful. So we'll keep hope alive.
Yeah. I mean, it's just one of those, it's like one of the safest things they can do, right? You don't have to worry about timelines. If you said it 2,000 years before, have at it. You can go, and you got a lot of that, those strings are detached from you. So there's a lot of creative flexibility there if they go there. So it all makes sense.
But hey, dear listener, if you're looking for a Friday night hangout for Star Wars The Old Republic, join us on the Cantina Cast Star Wars Discord server.
That's right. We're playing.
Well, not me, but you guys. I just make fun of y'all.
Yeah, you just make fun of us. Yeah.
Friday nights, 8:00-ish.
Maybe closer to 9.
Maybe.
Closer to 9. And then the last thing we have is the rise of Skywalker, the rise of Luke Skywalker. So very recently, Billy D. Williams was out and about on the press circuit, and I guess he slipped up and said the rise of Luke Skywalker when he meant to say the rise of Skywalker. And he had his publicist or his, assistant or whatever with him. And there's some video out there where you can see the look on that person's face, as to say, like, ixnay on the Luke Skywalker. That's not, we shouldn't be saying that. And of course, the internet just took this, ran with it. And now everyone believes that he has let slip that really the title of the movie, The Rise of Skywalker, is directly referring to the rise of Luke Skywalker, reincarnated in some way. And I don't know that that's really the case. I can see that's probably one of the choices. But to me, I mean, is this just a senior moment? Billy, he's pretty old.
He is pretty old, and man, God bless him. We love him to death, right? But everyone makes mistakes. And you know what? How often have we said Skywalker without Luke in front of it? Mm-hmm. I mean, not very often. Usually they go hand in hand, right? You don't just say Luke, you say Luke Skywalker, because why not? It's like one of the coolest names ever invented. He's older. I mean, he's saying these same things over and over and over. You get mentally fatigued on this. So I'm willing to chalk it up to that. maybe he let something slip. There's always that potential. But at this point in the game, I'm not sure how much all of the characters know about the entire end-to-end story anyway, because Star Wars has been notorious for not telling the cast the entire story except for those who really need to know the very critical parts. And even then, there's a history of them lying to the characters, to the cast, and saying, hey, this is what's really happening. In reality, it's going to be something totally different that they overdub later on. But I'm just going to chalk it up to a little mental fatigue. We're running them pretty hard. Let's give Billy D a day off, let him recover a little bit.
Yeah, get him a Colt 45, let him kick back.
Okay. Works every time.
Okay, main show time. And so, again, this is kind of an extension of the Master and Apprentice show that we did, I guess, about 2 weeks ago now. Right. We really had a lot of material. I mean, that show went almost an hour and a half, if I'm not mistaken. And we went into that show thinking we still had a lot of content here that we really wanted to cover. And we may have touched on a couple of these things, but really wanted to kind of come back, talk about Visions and Prophecies in general, kind of maybe talk a little bit about what that looks like from a real world perspective, dive into some of the Star Wars stuff, and then really end on breaking down some of those prophecies that we read about or heard in Master and Apprentice, the novel. So spoiler warning here. Again, if you haven't had a chance to read the novel, you might want to go ahead and do so, or just go ahead and turn it off here once we start talking about the prophecies themselves, because we are going to, again, try to break those down and really talk about maybe what was going through our head as we heard and read those things and what they possibly could be referring to, either in the timelines that we know, or maybe it's something that's happened in the past or something that's kind of happened in the future. Yeah.
If you're ultra sensitive to speculation for Rise of Skywalker, you might follow the same advice, just in case you want to feel like you're going in completely pure. We know some people are very, very sensitive to that. So the prophecies might have tie-ins to Rise of Skywalker. We don't know any of the spoilers in that regard, but it's just where the conversation takes us. If you're sensitive to that, you've been warned on that front as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, well, let's talk about Visions and Prophecies first, just kind of in general, because this is, in my head, when I hear vision and I hear prophecy, I guess it always just synonymously kept them kind of the same thing. Like, to me, they always really did feel the same thing. But when you really start thinking about, especially in Star Wars, what the difference is, there are some kind of stark differences between the two. And I threw some really quick notes here in terms of like what visions were, at least in my head. I didn't even go dive into any like definitions. There was I almost purchased a Time Life books. If you guys were alive during the 80s when those came out, they actually had one on Visions and Prophecies. And I got so excited because I was like, oh, I've got a reason to buy this book now. And I didn't pull the trigger on it. So I didn't go that far into the deep end on this stuff, but just my own, I guess, general notes in terms of what visions are. The first thing that comes to mind with a vision as opposed to a prophecy is that visions seem to be very specific, right? People that tend to have these see very specific things, very specific actions. They see people, places, names. They can put names to these folks. And it's a very, very specific, again, something that happens that's just very specific. And we don't, there's not a lot of ambiguity to it, right? Whereas I guess a prophecy, and we see this a lot in the prophecies that we're going to talk about with Master and Apprentice, they can be very general, and there's a lot of interpretation to these things as well. You can read this a lot of different ways, and depending on who you are and where you are, you may come away having read that prophecy different than the person right next to you, or a person 50 years or 1,000 years from you. So let's talk about that just real quick. Did you kind of get the same feeling here in terms of that, or was there am I wrong in that?
No, I think you're largely correct. One thing about prophecy in our culture, at least, that tends to be attached to it is some sort of divine intervention that enables a prophetic moment, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're kind of ordained in the spirit, if you will. You have these abilities because you are so in tune, usually with whatever your religious aspect of it is, that you're a conduit for being able to see and witness these types of general activities. And you're right. It's very easy to conflate vision and prophecy. But in our culture, it's being a prophet of something usually has a pretty negative connotation with it, because it means you're a little crazy. But and quite honestly, it kind of works that way in Star Wars a little bit too, right? Yeah. We're going to find out here. But yeah, it's kind of this, this not a balance, but this really divine type of intervention that you have, that you are special in some way and you have some ability to connect that the rest of us don't. And I think that's how I also equate prophecy versus vision in particular.
Yeah. The other thing, at least in Star Wars land, it seems like a lot of these visions come by way of dreams and right. More than somebody being conscious and awake. I think that's more probably lends itself to a prophecy, either through meditation, that kind of thing. But like we think about just some examples, some quick examples with visions. We have Yoda. It comes to mind when he's meditating and he's kind of seeing a lot of that stuff happen. You can hear voices, that kind of thing. And whereas more of the prophecies tend to, again, kind of they can come from anywhere, really, not necessarily in dreams themselves. I guess maybe the other thing that really stood out for me too is that for visions, it almost seems like people aren't seeking those out, right? They just kind of happen naturally to them. And it happened with Qui-Gon. He wasn't trying to be prophetic. He wasn't out there trying to become a visionary or a prophet in any way. It just happened to go to bed one night and suddenly the Force spoke to him, right? It came to him in that way. And prophecies, I think they spoke about the mystics, the Jedi mystics were always out there trying to find and look for the next big prophecy and kind of transcribe them as they came in. I don't know. I guess that could be a difference, but then there's probably examples where that wasn't the case as well. So, it's probably not consistent, I guess.
Yeah, you can see where these get intertwined pretty quickly. I think another thing is that, and you had some notes in here about the Native American vision quests, which I think was a great example to bring up. These are rites of passage, but comparing this to Yoda, I think is pretty appropriate. You have this meditative state, and then in Native American cultures, usually you had to go and you have some sort of fasting for multiple days, and you're trying to find your spirit animal, your spirit guide in these ways, but you're trying to enter the state that allows you to see beyond what you can normally see. Right. You have to really let go of your physical self in order to make you ready to be able to see and to be able to obtain whatever this vision or this moment of inspiration or this moment of transcendence, I believe, if we start to borrow from Joseph Campbell. And I think it doesn't always happen, right? Just because you're in the state doesn't mean it's always going to happen. And even in Native American cultures, you have multiple times you go and do this. And sometimes at different stages of your life, you have to go and reconnect in order to do it. But even as a child, you might not do it on the first time. You might not do it on the second time, but you might do it on the third time. And I think that we see that with the Jedi as well. Not everybody is able to have visions, and that seems pretty clear. And maybe we can talk a little bit about how the Jedi treat those people at some point. But their ability to open themselves up, to be able to have them in the first place, seems fairly special and something that is developed over time about what's possible. And we see Yoda doing this throughout the trilogies of being able to see aspects of the future. But again, having clarity that it doesn't necessarily mean it's 100% true in a prophetic type of way.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Especially when those visions, like even as specific as those can be, and like I mentioned, the voices and seeing faces and that kind of thing, they're not very clear, and they are cloudy, where the prophecies are even probably more cloudy. They're very much more ambiguous and nebulous in terms of who we're talking about, and we're gonna get a good dose of that as we try to break some of these down a little bit later. There was I guess I want to talk about the purpose as well, and we're gonna hit on this too throughout the show, but the purpose of the prophecies, depending on where you're coming from, and I'm going to go to one that's probably close to me, just coming from my background, my religious background, and that's really like the book of Revelation in the Bible. That book is, you read the New Testament, and so I'm going to wax a little bit of religion here, so I apologize if you're not into this stuff, but when you read the New Testament, it's a stark contrast to Old Testament, and everything's great. You're reading the New Testament, it's very happy. There's a lot of great lessons. Jesus Christ is alive, that kind of thing. And you get to the book of Revelation, and it's like a total change. It's like all, doomsday, hell, and everything else. And it's a very different kind of writing. And depending on where you fall on the religious spectrum, the book of Revelation is one of two things. It is either things that have passed, or I should say things that have yet to come or about to come at some point, and the second coming of Christ, or it's really just John talking about the things that were happening around the year 90. And really, and this goes back to, what is the prophecy? Is it really a collection of things that will happen in the future, or are these writers, are the people that are gathering this information and seeing, or having these prophecies, are they really just talking about things that have either happened in the past or currently happening to them? And they're writing these down and taking them down and really turning these into lessons or warnings, if you will, for generations to come, so that they don't fall into those same kind of patterns or fall into those same things that maybe they went through as well. And we get a lot of that, and so to bring it back to Star Wars, there's some candid conversations that are happening in Master and Apprentice about this, where they kind of go back and forth in this. What are prophecies? Were they really things that are going to happen? Like Averroes, did he really truly believe that? Or were they really just things that people were talking about at the time? And I forget now who was it that kind of made that comment. It may have been Averroes himself, as a matter of fact.
Qui-Gon really set the stage for the interpretation of the prophets of old, or the mystics, rather. Yeah. To tie that together a little bit, Qui-Gon, the way that we went into the novel understanding this, or whether he explained it to us, is that the prophecies give us an insight into the way that the mystics and their ancestors of the Jedi Order saw things at that moment in time. So it was kind of like a history lesson, right? And it also gave them a view of how they interpret that now through the lens that they have. So how do they take their own experiences and translate that into what they're learning from the past and from those experiences then? So it was very much this kind of like a history lesson, and not taking them literally, and kind of a fun exercise, if you will, of historical significance and purpose.
Yeah, no, that's.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, back to just Book of Revelation. That's exactly what was going on there, right? With John writing that book, you can see the war in Jerusalem in there. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius is in there as well. You could paint all of the Roman empires and all the rulers of the Roman rulers over the years up until about 76, 90 BC or AD. There, you can almost identify those, the 666 coming from, who was it? Is it Nero? I may be getting that wrong now, but anyways, the point is, like what you just said, we read that book today, and if you're coming from a religious background, you're looking at that going, these are things that are going to come and things are going to happen, and this is why we need to be good and prepare ourselves. Or you can look at those and just say, I know exactly what he was talking about here, and maybe there's a different message there more than just the second coming of Christ.
Right. And you see this with Nostradamus as well. In our culture, he's kind of our modern day reference point for prophecy type of deals and major events beyond the Bible. And it's kind of paralleling a little bit with Qui-Gon's interpretation at the beginning of the novel of it's how people view Nostradamus when they kind of get past the, wow, this is exactly happening just like he said it would, into the world and all that, is really, he had a lot of the way that he based it was really off of historical reference points and scenarios that lined up at that time. And he knew that they would happen again. And so he was basically theorizing that, at least on a very high level, I know I'm paraphrasing immensely here, but basically that this same scenario would present itself in the future. So it's reasonable to expect that this set of events or something similar is very probable to happen again in some way, and using this historical reference point, which I think is kind of what Qui-Gon was referencing. If you want to take it that literally, you could see a direct parallel with how Nostradamus fits in with what the story that Claudia Gray was telling in Master and Apprentice from Qui-Gon's eyes at that moment in the book.
Yeah, they're definitely, with like Nostradamus, there are a number of things that he said, and this is what, 16th century. I think we did the math on that before we came on the show. 16th century gentleman, and and it's well beyond the scope of what we're trying to do in this show. But if you go and look at any of those sites that kind of track some of the things that he was kind of foretelling that would come to pass, a lot of them have come to pass, and a lot of them have come to pass many times over. And to your point, I think what he was really doing is just, he was counting on human behavior and these patterns that exist, that have always existed in our times, regardless of technology or, civilization advances, that kind of thing. These things are just going to happen because at the core of it all are just humans, and we are unfortunately very predictable in terms of what we will do at some point. So it's kind of easy. I shouldn't say it's not kind of easy to be a prophet, but or maybe it is. There's a lot of prophets out there, even modern day prophets. I went out and I was like, well, let me just see how many modern day prophets we claim to have today. And there's a lot of them, a really whole lot of them out there that have really nice websites, and they're talking about all kinds of stuff that's about to happen. And you can argue again that most of these things have already happened in the past, so they're not really new prophets or new prophecies in any way or sort.
Right. The cynic in me always says, what does the prophet have to gain from all of this? If you're just a conduit for knowledge and for foretelling, that's one thing.
Right.
But of course, if you start bringing profit or other expectations of fame and glory and all that, that's a little bit different story. So it's kind of like, where are you coming in from it at? And I think that's something that the Star Wars books didn't really give us a flavor of
you're right.
What's that motive? But at the same time, you could see where the doubt in the Jedi kind of doubt the motives at time about just how genuine they might be.
Yeah. And in Star Wars, we've had a lot of visions. I mean, the Master and Apprentice obviously has, Qui-Gon's vision, which plays a huge central piece to the whole novel in terms of what he sees and how ultimately what he does to not do anything and allow that vision to kind of play out. And I think one of the things that we've spoken about on this show many times before is this idea that whenever someone does have a vision, anybody that tries to go in and interfere with that vision or change it or modify it anyway never really has the outcome that they expect. That said, and maybe this still reigns true, I think the only one that we know of, at least in canon, that's been able to have a vision and it plays out exactly as they saw it and wanted it to was Ezra in the Purgle at the very end of Rebels. I guess you could throw Bendu's as well, where Bendu says, I see your defeat, like many arms surrounding you in a cold embrace. He tells that to Thrawn, and we did see that one play out as well. But for the most part, by and large,
great line.
Yeah, I know, right? But by and large, this never goes well for anybody that tries to interfere with visions, and I think that's why Yoda is so hesitant to allow that, because it does lead down the path of the dark side, because it ultimately starts to consume and control you. Because that becomes your primary focus. You give up on the will of the Force and try to control the Force itself, which obviously is something that you would expect from somebody who follows the dark side or someone like a Sith.
Right.
What are any other visions? We got a whole bunch of them here, and we don't need to go through all of them. But I was just kind of spitballing on some of these things. But any other ones that stand out for you that we've seen either in the comic books or movies or TV shows?
Well, I think the Vader comic, we've touched on it before, and it's still so telling from everything that he saw. And we saw this in the Mortis arc as well for Anakin. And you could argue that these are, I'm guessing these are really truly visions, less so prophecy.
Yeah.
Because they are things that will come to pass in some path of the future, whatever that timeline looks like, if we stay away from the Avengers way of doing things. But but yeah, I think those are really interesting ones to go back and explore. And we've done that in previous episodes, so we won't rehash it here. But I think those are great ones to go revisit, of being able to say what can a vision tell you, and what does the character take away from that vision, and what that next step looks like. And I think Vader 25 did a fantastic job of not answering that latter part of the question, but definitely giving Vader this clear picture of things happening, or relatively clear, this path of his life and where it's still headed, without giving him 100% clear direction. But he takes away, what he takes away from it is very clear in his mind. And he doesn't tell us what that is, so I can't elaborate, but he walks away saying, I got exactly what I needed to know.
Yeah.
And effectively said Palpatine lied to him, but whatever.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it is, right?
Yeah. So I have a question, and this is honestly just kind of came to me right now because as I was reading Master and Apprentice, and when Qui-Gon had his vision of what was going to happen, to me it solidified this idea that that he really became wholeheartedly in favor of the prophecies and really truly believed them, even though there was doubt at one point up until then. And I got a sense from the novel, at least in the context of the way it was written, that visions really aren't something that happens with a lot of consistency for Jedi. And I don't know if that still holds true, because when you think about Yoda training Luke, and Luke is kind of upside down, he's floating the rocks as an Empire, and he starts seeing, Han, Luke, and Leia, and he's asking Yoda, and Yoda tells him, hey, while you're at peace, at calm, these things, friends, I forget I'm kind of paraphrasing the line, but he basically says that you may see some of these things from time to time. And if you go off that alone, off the movie reference, it almost feels like in that context that, hey, this is just something that happens to Jedi, and don't be afraid of it, and it's going to happen again, that kind of thing. But then when you go back and I think about like Clone Wars, and I think about the comics, and obviously Master and Apprentice, it seems like really the only very privileged or some of our special Jedi really get to have visions, and it really isn't just everybody. Would you agree there, or do you think there is a chance that if you are a Jedi at some point, you're going to have a vision or two?
I think it's possible, and I think the Native American analogy, or the symbolism between the two, is actually very appropriate. The Jedi, and Luke in Empire is a great example. He is in this state of, he's upside down lifting rocks, but he's in this moment of where he's letting go, and he can expand his, he's letting go of everything that's around him, and he's able to expand his thought. He's able to expand his being outward, and to where he is open to hearing whatever the Force needs to tell him. And I think this is where some Jedi, we could say that this is a skill, but I think some of this is also their demeanor about who they are. And I think this is why Qui-Gon is a better conduit, and even Yoda, I think Yoda as well, than some other Force users. Because when I look at a Mace Windu, I see someone, and kind of Anakin to an extent too, right? They're very action oriented. They're quick to jump in. They might meditate, but they don't always have this passiveness to themselves to where they can allow this to come in. Sure. Where Yoda and Qui-Gon, this is their being. Mm-hmm. And so it makes a lot of sense for them to have this disposition to have more of this type of, or to have more events, if you will, and to be more susceptible to the will of the Force, and to the Force to tell you things that you need to know. But what gets really twisted, and in Master Apprentice, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, is that the Force willed Qui-Gon to misinterpret the vision too. Yeah. So the Force has a sense of humor, I guess, of sorts.
Yeah.
It kind of turns like when you think you figured it out, it turns it on its head, and you don't really know anything anymore.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of what Yoda seems to be always, for as much flack as we give Yoda, that's one thing he does stay pretty consistent about is, hey, don't put too much faith in the visions and what you see, because it's always in motion. You never know how this is going to turn out.
Exactly. The actions of one person and next down the line can influence what happens next. And you can't plan for that every single time, because every decision you make is going to shift that line just a little bit.
All right, well, let's get in and talk about the prophecies from Master and Apprentice. And we're going to take these, I think I have these in order of which they came in the chapter. I was just flipping through and then writing them down. So if I get one out of order, I do apologize. But we'll start with the first one. And this one is, she who will be born to darkness will give birth to darkness. And this happens in chapter 5. And this was, it even says, it says it was written in old Alderaanian. So you think Alderaan, you think Princess Leia, you look at this quote, she who will be born into darkness will give birth to darkness. This one seems, at least on the surface, pretty obvious, to me at least, that this prophecy is referring to Leia. Leia being born into darkness, in that she was born to Anakin Skywalker, who had just been baptized as Darth Vader, and during a time when the Jedi Order had just fallen, and that the dark side itself had just, finally resurfaced through the Emperor after, 1,000 years. And then the second part of that is giving birth to darkness. I mean, it's got to be Kylo Ren, right?
Yeah. If you're going to stick with Leia, it's got to be Kylo Ren.
Yeah. And
did you have any other theories though, that it might be someone else?
I didn't really. No, this one was like, nope, this is too obvious for me. I think that I don't think I really dove into it. We can come back if you got one. I want to hear it. I do want to come back and talk about Kylo Ren because I wonder if it plays into the Rise of Skywalker here. But who were you thinking of here?
Right. I mean, when you and I were reading this a few weeks ago and talking with Mike, we had kind of posed the question. Some of these seem really on the nose, and maybe in a misleading way. So I started thinking, I was like, okay, who else could this possibly apply to? And you could probably stretch this a bit and apply it to Rey and say that she was born from the dark. So the darkness bore, or it illuminated the light within her. So you could argue that she was born from darkness. And now the birth to darkness, if you want to tie it in with Rise of Skywalker and you tie that into Palpatine or a Vader or something like that, you could argue that it is then rekindled darkness in some other way. Right. So you could kind of stretch it in a variety of ways if you really want to tie it to what we are going through right now with the movies, or you can be, like you said, the most obvious one has to be Leia because it just fits it to a T. But what if it wasn't? Right. And then that's kind of the angle I went with it. If it wasn't, what else would it be?
Yeah, and I think some of the debate I've seen around this one, to bring it back to that second part of giving birth to darkness, has really been around Kylo Ren and whether or not Kylo Ren would be the darkness, and does that ruin any hopes of him being redeemed? And I've seen people argue this they're dying on hills left and right for this thing. In my opinion, I don't think it, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that because it says we'll give birth to darkness that we would take that literally, because I think that's the whole point of Star Wars, right? That we've got so many characters that we've seen that come in and are evil that turn, good, or that are good that are evil. That's not right. It's just it's a one moment in time in their lives. So I think that even if you want to call Kylo Ren the darkness, that doesn't, it's not a foregone conclusion, I guess, that he's going to stay dark and that there's no hope for a redemption arc. I think he can still be redeemed. And Anakin was obviously probably a way better example of somebody who we thought had bottomed out, was never coming back. And then at the very end of Return of the Jedi, redeemed himself in saving Luke and the galaxy, if you will.
Right.
And the other part of it, it's interesting that, Leia and Anakin are now prophesized, but Luke is not. I don't really have any more than that, but I just thought it was interesting. And I think when we first read this, I posted on Instagram, I think I posted a picture of Leia with this quote on there, and I was like, cool, she's just like her father. She was prophesized just like her father. But then where does that leave Luke? And maybe there is a prophecy for Luke a little bit later, but we'll come to that in just a bit. Okay. The next one is when the Kyber that is not Kyber shines forth, the time of prophecy will be at hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, the most obvious one in the book is the Kolan crystals, because the Kolan are they're similar to Kyber, but they don't have the strength and the power. They're difficult to tell apart on the surface, but their properties are different enough to where they're not the same. And so if you take that very literal, because the Kolan crystals did have a kind of a front and center approach in the book, then once we've encountered those and we even see the effect of that, then the time for prophecies to begin to come true is now, right? This is the beginning of the prophecies becoming true. And this is where we start to see Qui-Gon's shift a little bit of understanding, maybe I should be taking these literally, where I've looked at them more of this historical reference, but instead, maybe it's time, and maybe I need to take them more seriously in order to interpret them and see how we should be interpreting them. What are they trying to tell us? What should we be learning from this? But this one, again, if you're going to be really on the nose about it, this one is speaking directly to the crystals. But is there another interpretation to have on this one?
I mean, this one's really hard to kind of spin it out. I mean, it gets a little easier, quicker if you get into Legends, because just take it at face value. Kyber that's not Kyber. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is synthesized crystals, right, from the Legends series. But what prophecy would they be talking about? Yeah, I mean, who knows what the prophecy could be at that point, because they've used them for so long. I mean, you'd have to, if they're going to the origin of kyber or synthetic crystals, then wow, you really have to go back. And we're talking Old Republic, and we're talking a lot of material that probably predates even like the game and some of the books that we have. And I just don't even know that there's anything that we could tie a prophecy to, or say that we have a prophecy to go back and say, okay, they're probably talking about this particular prophecy when those synthetic crystals really came to be. So
you can even theorize that this applies to Fanry. Fanry was masking who she really was. So you could equate it to her. Now, that might not be as powerful or as prophetic, but it still fits. I mean, she was pretending to be the meek child that, was taking over power and still very innocent. And then turns out that she was the absolute opposite, kind of power hungry. Heart was in the right place, but went way overboard with it. So again, she wasn't what she seemed. And it began this idea of prophecy. And again, you could then equate Qui-Gon is the prophecy. The time of Qui-Gon is now at hand.
Yeah.
You could even take it to that extent.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that one. I think this one was really made for the book, I think, more than anything.
I agree.
But yeah, it's kind of fun to kind of, theorize about what the other options could be. And the next one is, when the righteous lose the light, evil once dead shall return. So I read this and you think evil once dead shall return immediately goes to Palpatine for me. When I see the righteous losing the light, the righteous being somebody like Leia, and losing the light meaning Ben. I don't know. That's what I got. What?
And this will tie into another one here in a couple, but you could also equate this to the Jedi and the council as a whole, the order as a whole. When the righteous start losing the light, when they start losing their core light, they start looking. And the book really did a great job. We had talked about these lines that Qui-Gon and Rael shared of they choose the light because it is the light.
Right.
And I think that's a powerful statement. And you could apply it to this, where once you start to lose that, the evil once dead, we could equate to the Sith Empire or to the Sith rule of two or to Palpatine rising or however we want it to be, and equate it to, it's the Jedi Order as a whole losing their path. And it opens the door for all of the corruption and everything else that we see in the prequels.
Yeah, I think either one is good. I think I would agree that it's probably speaking to the Jedi, about the Jedi Order and the rise of the Sith again.
But you see the problem with prophecy, right? Because it's still interpretable.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you still have all these abilities of saying which path does it really mean. And even if we're joking around with some of it, one tiny event misinterpreted could take you on a completely different path. And to the point you had earlier of, I have to control this now. I have to make some sort of change to what I have envisioned, but also what I'm hearing from the prophets of old, the mystics. They already saw this happening, and now I'm seeing all these things line up. I have to pay attention, right? And I think Qui-Gon's perspective of that is really important not to lose sight of, which is why I bring it up. He needs to meditate and learn of it rather than try to influence it directly.
Yeah. I mean, some of these are very, could easily become self-fulfilling prophecies too. We didn't really touch on that, but it's not, it doesn't take much to take a prophecy or a vision of some type and then turn it into a self-fulfilling prophecy where the events that you take or do end up contributing to it, and so that it plays out just the way you thought it was going to, or from your perspective, how it was going to play out. But, all right, so let's talk about the next one. One will ascend to the highest of the Jedi despite the foreboding of those who would serve with him. So this is in chapter 10. And I guess before we try to guess who this could be referring to, if you take it literally, it states that the highest of the Jedi, and this is where I get caught up on the wording, and this is kind of what you just said right now, where I just do.
Right.
But the wording, it says the highest of the Jedi. And when I think the highest of the Jedi, I think the master of the order, who was,
Grandmaster, right?
Yeah, or the Grandmaster, or the Jedi Grandmaster. And so the difference being the master of the High Council was the master of the order. And so that was Mace Windu, I think prior to Attack of the Clones or just shortly after that. Whereas if you're talking about the Jedi Grandmaster, who was Yoda, that's somebody that's, obviously somebody different, a different role. And then you could even say that the highest of the Jedi really could just be talking collectively as the Jedi High Council itself. Right. So it could be any one of those things. And it really just depends on, again, on your interpretation. But then you got to think, okay, so if they're in every one of those scenarios, despite the foreboding of those who would serve with him, interesting that it's a pronoun here, but it could be Anakin and his seat at the council. You could make an argument that maybe it's Qui-Gon, even though technically he was never made part of the High Council. They at least extended him the offer, and he was considering it during this whole time of a master and apprentice. But so those are kind of my initial thoughts. But what are you feeling on this one?
Yeah, I think there's another one. You could even ask if Dooku would apply to this as well, because what we learned in the Jedi Lost book is that we have always known that Dooku's got a pretty high opinion of himself, but he was always able to back it up. And that rubs people the wrong way from time to time, or rubs some people wrong all the time. Mm-hmm. And what we learned in Master and Apprentice is, it was a very fractured vote for Qui-Gon. And I'm curious if something around was similar with Dooku and the way that he escalated to it, even though he clearly had the direct support of his master and Yoda. But it's just another character to throw in there of, you might have some amount of reservation amongst the rest of the council, no matter how powerful you are, but just with your way of thinking, your way of doing, your way of acting, that is, at odds with the rest of the council. But this one was a little bit, I didn't really quite know how to interpret this one all the way.
Yeah, I think it really just goes back to who are they talking about? Who is the one that will ascend to the highest of the Jedi? And when I see that, to me, it seems like it's either Anakin or Qui-Gon. Although I like your argument about Dooku being in there as well.
I'm trying not to say too much for next week.
No, right, we don't want to spoil the audiobook as well. All right, let's see. What do we got here? Only through.
I'll read this one for you. Go ahead. Give you a break here. This is in chapter 15 and 16 as a reference. Only through sacrifice of many Jedi will the Order cleanse the sin done to the nameless.
Yeah. So I got a lot of questions here on this one.
Do it.
So the first question is around the sacrifice itself and what they mean by sacrifice. So is it the sacrifice of the Jedi, I think, is more Clone Wars and specifically the war itself, not Order 66, because I've seen some people make this argument saying it's Order 66, but I don't feel like Order 66 was a sacrifice. That they were basically murdered, right? They weren't sacrificing themselves. Now, in the context of the war itself, I think they were sacrificing themselves for the greater good, right? They were putting themselves in these roles as generals of the war in hopes of bringing about peace. And through that, I think they sacrificed themselves ultimately. And so I think that's kind of where they're going for. I think it's also interesting that they call out the Order here, and it is a capital O for Order, so proper noun. And it feels like we're obviously talking about the Jedi since they just mentioned that. So that one seems pretty clear. I want to come back to the next part because it says it will cleanse the sin. I'll come back to that in just a second. It says of the nameless. Now, the nameless is the one that threw me off for a little while because you can interpret this a couple of different ways. But the first thing that came to mind when I see the nameless, I think of slaves. I think of people who don't have a voice like a slave or a name, if you will, and whose really only sin is that they were born into slavery or made slaveries, through brute force, or in the case of Master and Apprentice, where Zerka was taking these families or people that had committed these petty crimes and were making them slaves based on that, and then they had them for life, and then allowed them to kind of breed, and then once they had kids, those were now the property of Zerka and were slaves as well. And so I think that to me comes first as nameless. The other thing that comes to mind with nameless is, and this came in again from Dooku Jedi Lost, was the Jedi themselves, like these babies that are taken at a very young and early age that never know their names. They don't know their families, as we saw in that audiobook. But it kind of goes against I don't know how you would cleanse the sin of the Jedi who are the Jedi themselves. But yeah. So anyways, nameless for me, it seems like it's the slaves. And when I see this, I'm wondering then, if you want to take it back to the Rise of Skywalker, do you think there's any possibility we're going to get some kind of liberation of the slaves altogether, and that prophecy is filled out, or at least what Anakin said out? He said that he had that dream, the vision, if you will, that he had come back and freed all the slaves. Is this something that we would see then, if that's the case here?
Ooh, I wasn't ready for that question.
Sorry.
I don't know.
That's fine.
Maybe.
That's a valid answer. You don't need to think about that right now.
It's a lot to work through.
Yep.
I say that a lot, but that's a lot to work through.
How far off was I from you on this one, though?
No, you touched on on several points that I had the same ideas around. And I do want to touch on Nameless. I think Nameless, you could also say, is just the common folk of the galaxy, right? To the Jedi, those people are nameless. They don't have names. They don't interact with these communities. And we get this in the book often, more than one occasion, right? Of the Jedi are on the richest planet in the core world, and they sit up on the highest level. They don't have this connectivity to their environment anymore. They don't have this connectivity to the people. They don't have a direct connection to serve the people on the people's terms. Thinking farmland, simple life, manual labor type of things, the everyday common things that we have to do just to survive and live and have a simple life, rather than deal with the galaxy's problems. So I kind of did that in that way, but also when I looked at this purely from a Jedi order, is the Sith the nameless as well? And this is where sin really comes in this kind of perspective, right? And I know this is a Jedi prophecy, but you could twist it in this way. So the sacrifice of the Jedi, so sacrifice again has to suggest it comes from within. We make a decision to sacrifice. You cut off an arm to save, the rest or whatever. We know that in the Sith legends that there was a great travesty done by the Jedi to the Sith that had a mass effect, a mass wipeout. This happened back in, was it Old Republic days, right?
Yeah.
You're my Old Republic historian here, so keep me honest. So you could say, you could equate this prophecy to something along those lines of the greatest sin done to the nameless, the Sith, who are lost to history. And we're talking,
so to be clear, sorry, this is just for the listeners, we're talking about the Sith race itself, right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think even the Sith army did this too, right?
Yeah.
It was
that's
mass weapon of destruction, and the Jedi interfered, and it had a reverse effect, and it wiped out the Sith, right?
Yep.
All right. And, but yeah, so I think you could view it in that way as well. And from that perspective, you could argue that maybe this is Anakin again. Again, that's not a sacrifice necessarily, but you might, there's an argument there. You could argue that he is making a sacrifice, but it's directly to the sin. So there's some play on words in there a little bit, but you're right. The order, capital order, cleanse the sin, is a very interesting one, that is coming from on high, and that this is a decision made at the highest level, that they need to call the ranks. And yeah, I don't know that we're seeing that very, very clearly. No. At least it's not articulated.
Yeah, it's what I get hung up on, that cleanses sin. Like that's the part that I really had a hard time kind of putting a noun to here. But let's look at what do you got for the next one here? So
again, chapter 15 and 16 just kind of laid a bunch out. Obi-Wan is just rolling them off.
Right.
So this one seems pretty appropriate though. The danger of the past is not past, but sleeps in an egg. When the egg cracks, it will threaten the galaxy entire. This is one that I took a little more literally with Dooku Jedi Lost. And we have the Terataka, although it's not spelled like that, but the Terataka of basically it coming to life for Dooku. And the egg cracking is, rebirth or birth in general. And we'll explore this here next week, but the rebirth of the Terataka sets some things in motion, both for Dooku as a character. It opens up something inside of him as well that you could argue have galaxy ramifications later on. And this is a thing from the past. There's some things with the Jedi Vault, so on and so forth. Again, sorry to really hover over that, but that's kind of where I took this one. Did you have another interpretation?
Yeah, I actually had a couple of them. So when I think the very first, like my visceral kind of reaction to this one, if you will, was I immediately went back to Dark Empire comics. And if you remember the cover from Dark Empire #5, you get a picture of the Emperor who's kind of just he's burst out of one of his tubes, right? These glass tubes that he was cloning himself in. And the whole premise of this comic was that the Emperor is alive. This takes place after Return of the Jedi, and he's been cloning himself, and he's got multiple clones of himself. But I think of that as being kind of the egg. It gives me thoughts of like the Matrix when we see all of the embryos that the robots or whatever they are were kind of harvesting to keep the energy going from humans and that sort of thing. So from a literal perspective, that's the one I think of an egg. That was the first thing that came to mind. But there are two other things that that are pretty recent that are canon in Star Wars. We actually did have literal eggs, and the first one is the Poe Dameron comic. There was that blue egg, the Kresh culture. There was and we never really got an explanation into what it was. All we know is that they were, protective of this egg. The species was protective of this blue egg, and that in that egg, they claimed that the Savior Unborn existed in it. And again, we never really saw the end of where it kind of went, and they obviously never cracked or anything. I never got the sense that it was really anything that was evil or in any way. But I mean, who's to say? We don't really know how that was going to go. The other one that came to mind for me was Click Clack from Rebels. So he was the little Geonosian character that we saw, and he was kind of one of his last. This is the episode. It's Ghosts of Geonosis, where Saw Gerrera and Ezra and Kanan all go back to Geonosis, and they find Click Clack, and he's holding literally an egg, and it's the queen egg. It's the last of his race and species, and of course Saul's wanting to wipe him out, and there's a whole theme here that's playing in throughout these two episodes of Rebels, where they're talking about whether or not it's okay to wipe out a race like that, and we end up seeing this egg later on in the Vader comic. Do you remember when we covered Vader, the 2015 series in issue #4, where Vader goes back to Geonosis and he runs into this very queen that we saw in Rebels, and she's now creating these like cybernetic, mutated Geonosian type bugs, and with all these robotic parts on them and that kind of thing. The only thing that would be kind of it kind of throws a wrench in this is that it says that will threaten the galaxy entire. I don't know that these Geonosians were really going to threaten the galaxy to that extent. But I think more than anything, I would say that this very much feels like it could be something that's tied to the Emperor, maybe something that we'll see in Revenge of the Sith. I don't know that we'll get a literal egg in that sense, but maybe it is something, like I said earlier, where it's a chamber or a glass vial or something that he's been using to grow himself in or rebirth himself in some way here later down the road.
Right. I also thought about Jurassic Park.
Yeah, that's probably true. That's exactly what they're talking about. They were prophesizing the coming of Jurassic Park. This next one threw me for a loop. I don't even know what to think about this one. When the Force itself sickens, past and future must split and combine. And again, this is in chapter 15-16.
This feels like I'm reading a Magic the Gathering card. And I just don't understand what it's trying to tell me.
So did I win?
Right. Yeah. What do I do?
So this one refers, the first thing that I got for this was the Force Awakens timeline. I don't know what the sicken part is. Just hold that thought. But when I think past and future must split and combine, I think about Rey and Kylo. So I'm not going to say this is a Reylo kind of prophecy. I won't go that far. But I think of Rey, who's somebody who seems to be very focused on the past, consumed by the past, right? And then you got somebody like Kylo Ren, who seems to be more focused on the future. He's wanted to destroy the past at some point, right? In The Last Jedi. And I think about if one represents the past and one represents the future, this whole theory that at some point in The Rise of Skywalker, they're going to combine in order to, I guess going back to the prophecy, heal the Force in some way. But ultimately, if healing the Force means removing the threat of Palpatine or whatever that is, then maybe that's what they're talking about here. Maybe this is a prophecy that's going to foretell something that we will see in the Rise of Skywalker between Kylo and Rey.
Yeah, and I think you throw Luke in there too.
Mm-hmm.
Luke's absence could have created this sickening of the Force, and it's now acting in these different ways. And again, past and future splitting and combining, you could interpret that in a lot of different ways of letting go of the past, like you were, I think, alluding to a little bit there, of getting away from that. You've got to break that apart, but then you have to come back and just accept that it's all part of the Force, the living Force. And it's everything that makes you up as a person and as a teacher and as a warrior and all these other things that manifests itself within the Jedi and within the Force, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so I mean, you could kind of view it in a more literal sense in some of those, but Luke, you can throw Luke in there, and there's probably a handful of people you could throw in there to have to go through that same journey. And I think, and then this might be somewhat kind of like a hero's journey type of quote as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah. All right, I'm going to let you take this next one because this one's just never heard of it. A chosen one shall come, born of no father, and through him will ultimate balance in the Force be restored.
It's this chosen one nonsense, to quote Obi-Wan Kenobi.
This is
much younger Obi-Wan.
Yeah, well, this is the first time we've ever seen it, right? Like, actually read it and seen it. There was the, what was it? The Jedi Path book that came out a couple years back, several years back now. That had the chosen one prophecy, and I won't even get into all the debacle of that one, where there was too much being said, and so then they took a black marker and wiped it all out. And that's how, when you bought the book, there was a note in there from Luke saying that he thinks that Palpatine is the one that marked through all of it, and then somebody found a way to unmark it all, and then it got publicized, and that was supposed to be the chosen one prophecy, and that was again all legend stuff. And now this is the official prophecy itself, and there's a lot of things in here that, because I honestly don't want to break down the chosen one prophecy itself, but it is interesting to me that when we finally get it, it says the chosen one shall come, born of no father. We're all good there, but it's just next line that really has some interesting pieces in there. It says, and through him. So again, another proper noun. So it can't be a female, right? This is saying that, I guess this prophecy, whether it's a one-time thing, past, present, future, reoccurring thing, it's always going to be male, will ultimate balance in the Force be restored. And it's the through him is the piece that I think is really the more intriguing aspect of this prophecy. We've always, at least in my head, I don't want to lump you in, or you tell me if you're in this boat as well, but as I was growing up and we talked about the prophecy of the chosen one, it was the chosen one who directly brought balance to the Force, right? Through their actions, directly brought balance to the Force. And this one, when it says through him, does seem like it opens up an opportunity to say that it doesn't necessarily have to be their actions. It could be the action. It could be things that happen or are set in place, or things that are set in motion years down the road that ultimately would bring balance in the Force, even though they may not be directly doing it themselves.
No, and that's exactly where I'm at too. They can be a vehicle of sorts to get there, but they don't have to be the actual manifestation of the event themselves.
Right. And so this opens up like Rey to be a quote chosen. And I'm probably, I don't want to piss anybody off here, but Rey could be now the chosen one, or could ultimately bring balance to the Force and still not be the chosen one. Or you could throw Luke in there, or you could throw Ben in there, or you could throw Leia in there. Who knows? I mean, there's a lot of possibilities now to say that all these people contribute to bringing balance to the Force, although Anakin truly is still the chosen one.
Right. There has to be some significance, though. So we want to talk to Anakin specifically. There still has to be some significance if he has not restored balance yet, that in order for this to happen through him, he's the only one that can channel whatever that is, and whatever the rest of our characters need to do, it has to still go through him. He is the conduit to making this event happen. Mm-hmm. And I think from we've talked about this before. JJ's got this arduous task of trying to make this all feel like one giant saga, one big puzzle, right? And this is one way to do it. You have this focal point that you don't cheapen the characters that we've grown to enjoy and and see them on their own journeys and see them grow. You don't have to give all that away and say it's all about Anakin again, but you can still say it's rooted in this one individual, and his ability or his importance is how we're all going to make this work as a unit. And again, to your point, this is this avenue of where everybody can pitch in and everybody groups together and does this to face this common mortal, endless enemy, timeless enemy.
Yeah. I'm going to let you take this last one because this is the one this was the most interesting to me, honestly, even more than the Chosen One prophecy. And this is the last one we have. It happens it's in the very last before chapter. So between 34 and 35, but.
Right. He who learns to conquer death through his greatest student live again, will through his greatest student live again.
Yeah.
And that's a loaded one.
All right. So I'm going to ask you some questions here.
Sure.
Because this is how I broke this one down. So the first part, it says conquering death would be referring to both it could refer to both, I guess, the Jedi and the Sith, right? So let's talk about the Jedi. So they're talking about somebody that's going to live again. They want to know who the greatest student is, right? So what I did is I took all the Force Ghost people, and I want you to tell me who you think their greatest students are. So the first one I have is Qui-Gon Jinn.
Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yep. Ding, ding, ding. Ben Kenobi.
Oh, yeah, Luke.
Luke's your answer? Anakin?
Well, yeah, I guess
No,
Anakin.
and that's fine because I honestly, I've heard people make arguments of this is Palpatine's greatest student, but I don't necessarily buy that one.
Yeah, probably raw power-wise, I'd probably go with Anakin on that one, yeah.
Okay, what about Anakin Skywalker himself? Who was his greatest student?
Ooh. See, this is a loaded one. You could say Ahsoka, but is it Kylo Ren via Vader? But that wouldn't be Anakin.
Yeah.
But could you get there on a dotted line path?
Right, dotted line. Okay, next Force Ghost, and this is still talking about Jedi, Yoda. Who was Yoda's greatest student?
Probably, well, he's had so many, so it's difficult to say. But maybe Dooku. Dooku might have been his greatest student.
Dooku down. And then Luke. Who was Luke's greatest student?
I'm assuming that we're going to say Rey by the time we get to Rise of Skywalker.
Right.
I'm assuming we're going to have to equate her to his student.
Or is it,
if not, then it has to be Ben because we don't know that there's been anybody else.
Correct. Yeah, Ben Solo. And the reason I did this is because once you start trying to nail down, okay, who is the master and who is the student, then the next logical question is, okay, so which one of these people do you think is going to live again, right? So it's one of these people. If you were taking it literally, then we're stating that it's either Qui-Gon Jinn, Ben Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, Yoda, or Luke that will live again. And live again is open to interpretation as well, because it says he will conquer death. He who learns to conquer death. That could mean right there, that's Force Ghosts. But then it says will live again. To me, is that, I'm asking myself this question, is that resurrection? Is that reincarnation of some sort? Is that the rise of Skywalker here, where they're talking about Luke Skywalker and he conquers death by becoming a Force Ghost, and through his greatest student, whether it be Ben Solo or Rey in the Rise of Skywalker, does live again? And does this tie back to Billy D. Williams' slip of saying the rise of Luke Skywalker? So to kind of bring it back to that, because I teased it earlier. That's kind of, I don't know. There's a lot of different ways to interpret this one, I guess, but it's very intriguing.
Yeah, and if you use Luke as the example, either Rey or Ben fit, and you might even be able to make a case for both. Mm-hmm. It doesn't say students, but that might be a little too obvious if that is the case. Yeah. But you're right. But is this usually in the lore that we're used to seeing, and this isn't just Star Wars, this is kind of in general. And we saw this, I brought up Avengers earlier, and this is the sacrifice of the Soul Stone type of mentality of, in order to resurrect what you care most about, you have to sacrifice something equally important to you, right? It has to be the most important thing to you. And we see that pervasive in a lot of our cultures and a lot of our myths and legends. So is that a case here of where you've conquered death, but in order to actually achieve it and live again, we didn't even talk about Palpatine.
Well, I was going to say, we just looked at the Jedi.
That's
just
right?
the Jedi. So the Sith, and we won't go through to shorten it, the Sith, we've got Darth Plagueis, Darth Sidious. I threw in Momin, and then I had Snoke in there. So if you were to take one of those four and say one of these guys is coming back to life because through their greatest student, who would it be? And then who would you say their greatest student would be?
I mean, the only one that really seems logical is Palpatine through Vader, right? I mean, I think we have to associate Anakin Vader as Palpatine's greatest student.
Yeah.
Even though he ended up more machine than man. But I think overall he probably was. Dooku's probably up there in the conversation. But if we want to be literal about what we saw in the trailer, in the teaser, then that seems pretty foreboding that somehow Palpatine has learned to conquer death. And through this conduit, again, of Anakin, he has somehow learned in order to achieve and actually truly cheat death and regain his physical self, or whatever that self looks like in Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah. I mean, I threw Moment out there just because we don't even know anything about who his student was, so that's probably highly unlikely. Snoke,
he didn't have time for a student, is what he told us, right?
That's true, right? He had no time for anything except himself. Snoke, Kylo Ren would be his greatest student. I mean, if you go down that path and you're saying that we're going to get Snoke back in Episode 9. The other one that's interesting is Darth Plagueis, because I think they would never do this. I think it's too ballsy to suddenly bring Plagueis back in Episode 9 or canonize him in Episode 9 in this manner, because then you're making an argument that it's he's back alive through Palpatine in some way. So I don't know. I can't see them doing it in 9 at this point, just late in the game.
Same here. And he's just not important enough to the overall 9 picture story arc.
Yep.
As much as we all want to see Plagueis get a little screen time and get a little love, like in the canon variety, it's just not, I don't think it's going to come out in the movies, guys. I'm sorry.
So any final guess on who we're talking about? Who's going to come back alive in Episode 9? Assuming that this is talking about Episode 9, that's right. That's the fun part of this.
Well, I think it would be fun if it was Anakin for both sides.
Ooh.
Right. So Anakin does it for Palpatine, or Vader does it for Palpatine, and Anakin kind of split personality thing. And Anakin does it for Luke or for Yoda or something like that, and we don't have to get probably quite so tied down to who the direct student and master were in these, because I think there's enough precedent to where there was training going on and there's been relationships over time. But it would be interesting if Anakin was the conduit for both sides. Yeah. And that's how we get our grand finale battle that ties it all together.
Yeah. All right.
This was fun.
Yeah, it was fun. That was the last one. Thought about this one, these quite a bit. As I was reading, I kept stopping and writing notes down, and really I found myself spending a lot more time on this and then getting lost and having to go back to the book again. But those were really cool. I'm glad she did that. I hope we get more of these. We've got a little bit of that coming here in Dooku Jedi Lost, so we'll kind of pick this up.
Did you like just the rolling off of prophecy after prophecy after prophecy, though?
I did.
Or was that just a little overkill?
No, I think it was fine. I didn't mind it. There was, again, some of them felt too on the nose, right? That I was like, okay, this is in there just for the novel, and not necessarily not a bad thing, but no, I don't mind it. It did feel like they were there and they were fodder, or I guess she was fishing, if that's where you were going.
Yeah.
But it didn't bother me. It gave us something to talk about. We put a show together, huh?
Yeah, we did. Yeah. Thanks for the episode, Claudia. We appreciate it. X's and O's. I think the one thing I would have maybe preferred was for them, not to be quite so on point with what we have. And now if something comes out later on and it shows that the literal meaning again doesn't mean anything, we're just being too literal with it, that would be one thing. But I kind of like a little of the mystery, right? Give me a really odd way of saying it. Some of these did it like, so when the force itself sickens, past and future must split and combine. Something along that line that can be very ambiguous and very interpretable, and help us to put ourselves in the position of Qui-Gon and the people studying these, of saying, how the heck would I be able to interpret this? Because from Obi-Wan's perspective, it is so vague and it's so general. It could mean, like you said earlier, this could have happened countless times already. in the thousands of years since the mystics have been around, and it's been forever since they've been around. There are no mystics anymore. Those people probably run off to this Jedi prison thing that they talked about in the book, that they hide away the people that are Force crazy.
Yeah.
Right. And there's that whole contention we haven't really talked about either, is what does the Jedi do with people like this if they really do feel like they've gone a little Force crazy?
Yeah.
Overall, I mean, this was a lot of fun. I mean, I'm glad they did this. It makes sense within the context of the holocron. And it was really cool seeing the interaction with Dooku and Qui-Gon, and the reinvigorance of Dooku's interest, and also getting glimpses as to what this can do to people as they start to really dwell on this stuff.
Yep. Consume you it will. Yes.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's talk about, we got some shout outs from Discord. We got a couple new members. Fist of Fury recently joined us. We have Jay Eastman. I hope I'm saying
Jay
that.
Eastman, yeah.
Yeah.
He's also a Patreon.
He's a Patreon. Yeah. Thank you. He's back. I remember I reached out to him, and the name sounded familiar, and I couldn't remember where it was. And I think he used to be, or she, I don't want to assume anything. He or she used to be on our old Discord server. So anyways, thank you for coming back over. Charth Mall is with us now on Discord.
Another Patreon. Thank
you very much, sir or ma'am. GT Stick is my brother, doesn't count. And Phasma Forever joined us recently as well. So thank you guys for being in Discord. Hope you found your footing, and I've seen a lot of them contribute already. So
yeah, Fist of Fury might be a Discord or a Patreon member as well. So I'm going to go and give credit there too. And it's a cool name. It's kind of a Bruce Lee reference. As well at Kit Fisto.
Oh, I was thinking He-Man.
That's what I said too, but no, he corrected me. He's like, well, I like T-Man, but it's really, he loves Kit Fisto and he loves Bruce Lee. So we gave him some props for the Bruce Lee reference.
That's all fair. Right. We got any business to talk about? Yeah.
Yeah. On the EGM front, Smoking and Drinking in Space with Jason, and he's had James, or you might recognize him more as Crowley, and their friend Rob have been doing the entire Firefly series, and they're about to do the Serenity movie as well. So if you're like us, and if you're a fan of Firefly and Serenity, strongly recommend you guys checking that out. A quick note, that is a not safe for work podcast due to language. So just to make sure, if you don't have kids in the car, things like that, but they do a fantastic job. It's a lot of fun. And if you like these series, they go through each episode. They've done it over a series of episodes, and usually grouping 2 or 3 at a time, as well as some of the ones that didn't air on network TV. So a lot of fun. Encourage you to check that out. Smoking and Drinking in Space, wherever you get your podcasts, or over on earglumedia.com.
Well, that's going to do it for us this week, and we'll be back next week to talk about, more Knights of the Old Republic discussion. I'm kidding, Mike. I'm kidding. We're going to be talking Dooku Jedi Lost. We've talked about this enough, and we finally got through it. I think I'm on my second listening. I think you're on your third, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, there's a lot to kind of break down, and we're going to do our best to bring that to you on the next show. So before we go, any parting thoughts?
No, I foresee that we will end the show now.
See ya.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property, and all that other good, fun stuff. But I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what. So that's your disclaimer.